Last week, I posed a question. Should I A. Spend $1,800 on my dream bass, a Fender American Professional 2 Precision in Olympic White with tort pickguard and maple fretboard? B. Spend $250 on a Fender replacement body in Arctic White and use the neck from my Fender Player Jaguar, plus other components I had on hand, to assemble a Frankenstein approximation of that dream bass? Or C. Spend $280 on a Squier Affinity Precision and swap both necks to create the approximate dream bass and a Jaguar Monster strung BEAD, getting the low end of a 5-string in a 4-string. Double Frankenbass. Since the YouTube algorithm isn't friendly to surprises, the title of this video already told you that I went with option C. Let's start with the Squier Affinity unboxing and first impressions, and then we'll get into my Frankenstein creations. This just in. While I was busy mucking around with all of this, Fender did a rug pull by announcing the new Standard line, Fender-branded instruments made in Indonesia, priced at just $600. Based on my past positive experience with Indonesian-made instruments, if I had known they were going to do this, I probably would have just gotten one of those instead and called it a day. Now back to our regularly scheduled program. I got the Squier from Sweetwater, but at $279, it doesn't get their famous 55-point inspection. An inspection is not a setup, but it does involve a little TLC, and prevents obvious lemons from getting through. So what am I going to encounter here without that service? Being stupidly nitpicky, I immediately noticed some smudgy black marks on both the neck and the body. I suspected they'd come off with a bit of elbow grease, and they did. I'll explain the likely source in a bit. I also noticed that all of the bridge saddles were askew. That's obviously super easy to fix. Just, again, something you wouldn't see with an instrument that had gone through an inspection, I hope. The poplar body is very light, so there's some neck dive. Standing with a strap, it's fine, but it was a bit annoying while sitting. The finish is nice. It's extremely white. In pictures, these supposedly white basses, whether it's Olympic or Arctic, are usually pale yellow, and I assume many of them actually are, simulating the discoloration of vintage nitrocellulose lacquer as it ages. Nothing looks aged on this Squier. It's like the universe formed yesterday. I like the neck. The satin finish feels really nice. The fretboard edges are slightly rolled, and there are no rough frets. But it desperately needs a truss rod adjustment. It's not unplayable, but the action is higher than I would imagine anyone who's ever picked up a bass before would want. Plugging it in, the pickups sound perfectly acceptable. The knobs are satisfying to turn, with just the right amount of resistance, and the pots work well. Nice range for both volume and tone, with no abrupt shelf I sometimes find even on much more expensive instruments. Overall, I think the Squier Affinity is an excellent instrument for the price, and a great first bass for a beginner. Just get a proper setup on it first. Okay, now that I'm done singing the praises of this Squier Affinity Precision bass, let's demolish it. The first thing to go was obviously the strings. Then I removed the neck, bridge, and pickguard. Of course, on a Precision, the pots and output jack are attached to the pickguard. I tried to pull off the knobs. They don't have set screws, so they obviously pull off. But that proved to require a pair of pliers, so I skipped it for now. When I removed the pickguard, I was stunned. This low-end bass actually has shielding paint in the cavities, and grounding wires screwed into the body through the shielding paint. Fender often cuts this corner even on much more expensive instruments, like the Mod Shop disaster I bought last year. Anyway, good job, Squier. This also explains the black gunk. After mucking around in the cavities myself during this project, I got more of the gunk on the body, but it came off easily. And yes, I know this stuff is toxic, so I washed my hands frequently. I considered sticking with the stock black pickguard, but I want the pickguard to be where I express myself with a bit of color. I had an orange pickguard I was planning to use, but then I found a mint green one I'd forgotten about, and I was struck by the look. I also considered black perloid or the gold anodized guard from the Squier 40th anniversary, but ultimately I stuck with mint. Since I'm not planning to use the stock Affinity pickups, those came out as well. I was surprised to see they had springs on the bottom. Fender usually doesn't do that anymore. I wasn't planning to use the stock pots and output jack either, but I realized I needed the extra length of their wiring. This is a solderless project. Plus, they seem decent, so no need to mess with swapping, which lets me leave the Jaguar as intact as possible in case I want to reverse this process. Here's where my plans started to go sideways. I was going to reuse a pair of DiMarzio pickups, a split P from the Squier 40th anniversary, and an Ultra Jazz from the Jaguar. I even started removing the split P, but then I remembered it has a complete wiring setup from DiMarzio, and it wasn't immediately clear to me how to wire it up to this configuration, so I scrapped that plan. Instead, I dug out the stock pickups from both the Squier 40th anniversary Precision and Jazz. I don't know a lot about pickups, but I remember these actually sounded really good. It's a long story why I replaced them. And since their wires are cloth-wrapped, vintage style, it seems like Squier went above and beyond with the specs for those 40th anniversary instruments. So in the interest of not dismantling any other basses, I just reused those pickups here. Sure, they're gasp from Squier, but like I said, they're good. I don't like the buzz of a standard single-coil jazz pickup, but it has that classic jazz bass tone. That matters most. Once I had the pickups and the wiring reinstalled and attached to the pickguard, it was time to explore knobs. I wanted something unique. I have some Gibson-style push-on speed knobs that go to 11. I really wanted to use them, but they're amber and they look terrible with the mint pickguard. I also had black and gold ones that sadly only go to 10, but they really look sharp, so I went with those. But I only have 2 of them. So for now, I stuck a jazz-style mini knob on the tone pot. I kind of like the mismatch. Maybe. I'm not sure. But it's easy to change later. Now on to the main attraction, installing the Jaguar neck. Yes, of course, that Fender decal matters, more than I'm able to admit to myself. But I also just really like this neck. It has slim jazz neck proportions. The satin finish is just right. Not too glossy, but not unfinished feeling. It's perfectly smooth. It's lightly stained for a bit of an aged look, but most importantly, it just feels really great to play. I just gave it a truss rod adjustment last week, so the action is perfect. Probably the lowest buzz-free action I've ever had on any neck. Any dream bass I build is going to have this neck on it. My original plan was to use the high-mass bridge off my Mustang, but by this point I again wanted to avoid dismantling more basses. I considered a couple of other stock bridges I had in the drawer, but ultimately decided to bust out a brand new Gotoh bridge I had bought for the Mustang but never used. The Gotoh bridge is a drop-in replacement for a standard 5-screw bridge, but it also has 2 extra screw holes near the front. I decided to use those, even though it meant drilling into the body. Along the way, I discovered that the screws that shipped with the Gotoh bridge are slightly smaller than the stock screws, so they just slid into the holes in the body. And the screw holes in the Gotoh bridge are too small to accommodate the stock Squier screws, so I couldn't use those either. Time for my old trick. You can break off a piece of a toothpick, or, since we don't have toothpicks in the house, cut a half-inch piece of a small plastic cable tie and slip it into the hole. Now the hole is effectively smaller and the screw will thread in securely. I was a bit nervous using this trick on something that's going to hold as much tension as a bass bridge, but the screws do seem very secure. Plus, those 2 extra screws I added should prevent the bridge from, snapping off in the middle of a gig and slingshotting me in the face. Once the bridge was installed, it was just a matter of stringing it up. I'm reusing the same set of DR Legend flats I already had installed on the Jaguar. So as far as my left hand is concerned, this is exactly the same instrument I've been playing for months. Oh, but before I get to that, let's just get the Squier neck put on the Jag so I don't have to leave it sitting on the floor. It was a tight fit. Pushing it into place actually shaved a bit of wood off the sides of the heel. Along the way, I also delaminated a small spot on my custom Sangre del Diablo pickguard, which is a bummer, but whatever. Okay, let's check out this Frankenstein P bass. First off, it works. The Squier 40th anniversary pickups actually sound really good. Yeah, there's that single coil hum on the bridge pickup. I'll give it some time to see how much it bugs me. For now though, I think this bass kicks ass. But the action was high. Since I had just adjusted the truss rod, it must be the bridge. The Gotoh bridge shipped with the saddles cranked way the hell up. I lowered them almost as far as they could go, and then dialed in a perfect balance. Intonation only needed a few tweaks. Now this bass plays like a dream. I'm fairly certain this is the lowest action I've ever been able to achieve on any bass I've owned. I can't wait to take it to its first rehearsal tomorrow. But we're not finished. That's right, we have another Frankenstein's monster to assemble. This one's going to be a lot more straightforward because after adapting to the surprises I encountered with the other bass, I ended up not making any changes to the Jaguar besides swapping the neck. It just needs strings. Of course, I'm planning to string it BEAD with much heavier gauge strings than it had before, which means the nut slots might need to be filed. And that requires tools, not to mention luthier skills that I do not possess. So let's proceed with caution. I tested the B string and much to my surprise, it sat in the slot perfectly. I decided to just string it up as is and hope for the best. As it turns out, the other slots do need to be filed down a bit. It's not critical, it just makes it a bit harder to play the notes on the first fret because of the string angle. Keep in mind, I've already been at it for 3 hours straight. Also, I have a head cold. I haven't slept well in 3 nights, and I'm feeling a bit delirious at this point. So I'm going to consider the Jag as a work in progress. But I couldn't leave it without strings, which could warp the neck, so I did the bare minimum to make it usable. When I sat down to check the setup, yikes. The outer strings were marginally okay, but the middle strings were actually touching the neck at the top fret, making them unplayable. Not to worry. In an extreme case, this might require a neck shim, but there's a lot of adjustment you can do before resorting to that. First off, I already knew the neck needed a truss rod adjustment from how high the action was out of the box. I cranked the truss rod a bit more than I was comfortable with in one shot, but, well, we'll see in the coming days if that was a mistake. With the truss rod sorted, the top fret issue was still there. No surprise, I expected the truss rod adjustment to actually make it worse. Time to move to the opposite end and raise the bridge saddles. Again, I really cranked them up. This is probably the highest I've ever had saddles. I'm not sure if the Squier neck is thicker at the heel than the Jaguar neck or what. There's not a visibly noticeable difference, but I didn't measure it precisely. Anyway, I'm pleased to say the adjustments made all of the strings playable, so this instrument is ready to go. I may eventually file the nut slots, but I want to wait until I'm sure I want to keep this BEAD string configuration. So there you have it. I'm going to call my double Frankenstein bass project a double success. Does this mean I'm done with new basses, or messing with the ones I already own? Probably not. Especially now that Fender's announced the new Standard Series. I just can never leave well enough alone, but for now I'm happy.